Deadliest Inmates and the Dark Truth of Prison Food. Hunger Games behind bars. What if your punishment wasn't just the prison walls, but the food meant to keep you alive? This is the story of how hunger became a weapon, and why some of the deadliest inmates in the world turned their meals into messages of rebellion. The tray slides through the slot with a hollow clang, gray beans, a slice of white bread, and something that looks like meat but smells like disinfectant. For many inmates across the United States, that's not dinner. That's discipline. According to Amnesty International, the U.S. correctional system has long faced accusations of using food as control. The nutraloaf, a bland, brick-like meal, became infamous across prisons from Illinois to Florida. It was supposedly nutritionally complete. In reality, it was punishment disguised as nutrition. One former inmate from Vermont's Northern State Correctional Facility, identified in court filings as Inmate X, described it bluntly. It wasn't food, it was revenge baked in a pan. He wasn't exaggerating. Records from the Marshall Project confirm that prisoners were sometimes fed nutraloaf for misbehavior, like talking back to guards or refusing orders. In 2008, a Wisconsin judge ruled that the loaf could indeed be considered a violation of the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment. But this wasn't just about bad cooking. It was psychological warfare, an invisible punishment meant to break men already behind bars. Inside Red Onion State Prison in Virginia, a facility known for housing some of the most violent offenders, food was one of the few things left to control. Guards determined when, how, and even if an inmate would eat. A single misconduct report could land someone in segregation meals, smaller portions, colder servings, or simply fewer calories. One correctional officer, speaking anonymously to a 2019 BBC investigation, admitted, "You can't beat them. You can't shoot them. But you can make them hurt without laying a hand on them." And inmates knew it. Some of the deadliest, gang enforcers, lifers, or those with nothing left to lose, started using hunger itself as rebellion. In California's Pelican Bay, the hunger strike of 2011 became a symbol of defiance. Over 30,000 inmates across the state joined in, refusing food to protest solitary confinement and poor conditions. It was one of the largest prison strikes in U.S. history, and it all started with a few trays left untouched. Their demand wasn't for steak or comfort, it was for humanity. Behind every tray was a story, and sometimes, a body count. Inmates working in kitchen duty had immense power. They saw everything: who got extra portions, who didn't, who was on hot list with the gangs, and who was being starved out by the system. In one Louisiana facility, according to local news reports from The Advocate, kitchen workers allegedly slipped glass shards and bleach into meals during gang disputes. The prison denied it. But several inmates were treated for digestive trauma that same month, a detail quietly confirmed by medical logs obtained through the Louisiana Department of Corrections. Food became currency. Inside Cook County Jail, Chicago, a bag of chips could buy loyalty or silence. In Rikers Island, guards allegedly used meal schedules to provoke fights between rival gangs, according to a 2017 investigation by the New York Times. One gang member quoted in the report said, "They feed us late, cold, and dirty, then stand back when we fight for it." This wasn't chaos by accident. It was structure, the dark rhythm of control within the walls. But some of the most chilling stories come from inmates who once ran those kitchens. In an unverified account later cited in court testimonies, an inmate known as Ghost, a former gang enforcer serving life at USP Leavenworth, described how he poisoned rival members using cafeteria gravy. "You don't need a shank when the spoon can kill," he told investigators. Officials never confirmed his claim, but the pattern was clear: where weapons were banned, food became the battlefield. Even across the Atlantic, in Britain's HM prison Manchester, known as Strangeways, hunger played a role in rebellion. During the 1990 riot, inmates climbed the roof not just to protest overcrowding, but starvation-level rations. According to BBC archives, guards had cut meal portions to ration costs. The riot lasted 25 days, the longest in British prison history. And when it ended, one phrase echoed through the corridors: "They fed us like dogs, so we bit back." The link between violence and deprivation isn't theoretical. It's chemical. Psychologists from the National Institute of Justice found that prolonged malnutrition inside prisons directly correlates with increased aggression, paranoia, and mental instability. A starved mind becomes unpredictable, and in a system already boiling with violence, that's an explosion waiting to happen. Inmates who killed to survive, guards who weaponized hunger, and a system that learned starvation could control chaos. By the 2000s, many U.S. states banned the nutraloaf. But the idea behind it never disappeared, it simply evolved. Today, punishment by hunger continues in new forms: underfeeding, spoiled food, or contaminated water. In Mississippi's Parchman Farm, inspectors discovered rodent-infested kitchens and maggot-ridden meat as recently as 2020, according to the Clarion Ledger. Inmates described vomiting blood, filing lawsuits, and still being told to eat or starve. But the deadliest inmates didn't just suffer it, they adapted. Some formed underground cooking circles, smuggling seasoning packets, heating meals with wires from broken lamps, crafting recipes from commissary scraps. In places like ADX Florence, even a peanut butter packet could be worth its weight in gold. Survival became art. Hunger became culture. And through it all, one truth remained. When you control the food, you control the men. By the end of Chapter 1, the story of prison food isn't just about meals, it's about manipulation. Every tray tells a story of control, corruption, and silent rebellion. And as we move deeper into this series, we'll uncover how hunger shaped the deadliest inmates, and how they fought back in ways no one expected. Meals of control. The psychology of starvation. They say power in prison comes from fear or violence. But inside those concrete walls, true control often starts on an empty stomach. When the food stops, everything changes. Minds blur. Morality fades. And men who once swore loyalty begin to turn on each other for crumbs. That's not theory, that's human biology. According to a report by the Marshall Project, long-term calorie deprivation inside prisons doesn't just weaken the body, it dismantles the brain. Inmates underfed for weeks experience symptoms similar to battlefield soldiers: hallucinations, rage, and despair. The lack of nutrition becomes a weapon that targets not just the body, but the will. In Pelican Bay State Prison, where isolation cells swallow light and silence becomes noise, even the sound of the meal cart can feel like salvation. One former inmate, identified in court transcripts as JM, recalled, "You start counting your life by trays, not days. Food becomes time. And when that's taken away, time stops meaning anything." Across Mississippi's Parchman Prison, starvation has been cited in multiple lawsuits. In 2019, the Department of Justice launched an investigation after reports surfaced of inmates being served spoiled meat, moldy bread, and water tainted with bacteria. In statements obtained by the Clarion Ledger, prisoners described going 2 days without full meals, a pattern that blurred punishment into neglect. One of them wrote in a letter smuggled out, "They say it's punishment, but it's torture with a fork." The psychology behind this cruelty is ancient. The Romans starved prisoners to break their will before interrogation. Modern systems replaced whips with bureaucracy, but the outcome is the same: hunger humbles the human spirit faster than chains ever could. Inside the ADX Florence Supermax in Colorado, where some of America's most dangerous men live in near total isolation, control extends to every calorie. Meals are pre-weighed, sealed, and portioned to the gram. A single disciplinary infraction can mean a restricted diet, less food, fewer choices, colder servings. Inmates who lash out often refuse to eat, hoping to reclaim some control. But psychologists working with the Federal Bureau of Prisons warn that this defiance comes at a cost. Malnutrition worsens aggression, leading to a cycle of starvation and violence. A former prison psychologist interviewed by BBC Panorama explained, "You take away the meal, you take away stability. And when stability goes, humanity follows." Some guards have turned that understanding into strategy. During investigations into Florida's Department of Corrections, whistleblowers revealed how officers used mealtime as a management tool. Certain inmates, usually gang leaders or chronic troublemakers, were served last, ensuring their food arrived cold or missing. The message was clear: you don't control this place, we do. But inside the cells, the power games evolved too. Hunger became hierarchy. Gang leaders began controlling commissary trades, soups, noodles, honey buns, forming shadow economies worth thousands of dollars in a single block. A man's rank was measured not in shanks or tattoos, but in ramen bricks. As one inmate told The Atlantic, "Out there, money talks. In here, noodles scream. The psychology of food control isn't limited to inmates, it shapes the guards too. A 2020 University of California study found that correctional officers exposed to chronic hunger protests often develop desensitization patterns, their empathy erodes. Food becomes symbolic of obedience, withholding it, a test of dominance. That's how systems rot. Slowly. Invisibly. The cruelty isn't shouted, it's served. In some prisons, hunger became language. At HMP Belmarsh in the United Kingdom, political detainees historically refused meals not to die, but to speak. Each untouched tray was a sentence, each skipped meal a paragraph of protest. Amnesty International documented dozens of hunger strikes in the 1980s where silence at mealtime became the loudest voice against injustice. And that pattern repeated globally, from Guantanamo Bay to Karabakan prison in Indonesia. The hunger strike became both weapon and prayer, a desperate plea to be seen by a system designed to forget. But starvation isn't always inflicted. Sometimes, it's chosen. Inside New York's Rikers Island, a man named David Ortiz, name used with permission from public record, refused food for 42 days in 2014 after guards allegedly assaulted him. According to court documents filed by his lawyer, Ortiz's weight dropped by 60 pounds before he was finally transferred to a hospital. When asked later why he risked death, his answer was chillingly simple. Because starving myself was the only thing they couldn't stop. For some inmates, refusing food isn't surrender, it's rebellion. In a world where every move is controlled, hunger becomes the final freedom. But what happens when the mind accepts starvation as normal? Psychologists call it institutional anorexia, a learned adaptation to deprivation. When inmates survive on scraps long enough, their bodies adjust, but their empathy withers. They lose the instinct to protect others. That's how prisons turn men into ghosts long before they die. One former inmate, now an advocate with the Prison Policy Initiative, described it like this. Hunger isn't just physical, it's spiritual. You stop believing anyone will feed you again, even after you're free. In the end, the psychology of starvation inside prisons exposes a haunting truth. Food isn't just fuel, it's faith. When a system manipulates it, it doesn't just punish the guilty, it reshapes the human soul. And yet, through this darkness, rebellion still flickers. From death row hunger strikes to kitchen uprisings, prisoners keep using the same weapon the system uses against them, hunger. Because in the war between submission and survival, even a spoon can become a symbol of defiance. Kitchen kings, how the deadliest inmates took over the menu. Every prison has its hierarchy, the warden at the top, the guards below him, and the inmates scraping for control at the bottom. But in some of the most dangerous prisons in America, real power didn't belong to the gang shot callers or the guards. It belonged to the men who controlled the kitchen. The kitchen, it's where the system's order meets the inmates' chaos. And for decades, it's been the heart of corruption, smuggling, and silent rebellion inside America's prisons. Every tray that leaves those doors carries a message. Sometimes, it's just food. Sometimes, it's death. According to the Marshall Project, nearly 60% of contraband smuggled within state prisons between 2000 and 2020 originated from food service areas, from plastic gloves hiding pills to bread loaves packed with razors. The kitchen wasn't just a workplace, it was a battlefield disguised as a cafeteria. At Angola prison in Louisiana, often called the farm, kitchen duty was both a privilege and a trap. Guards used it to test loyalty. Gangs used it to send messages. And for men serving life, it became their only way to feel powerful again. One former inmate, speaking anonymously to The Advocate, said, "You run the kitchen, you run Angola. Not the warden, not the captain, the men who stirs the pot. Those who ran it could decide which inmate got extra portions and who went hungry. A single scoop less of rice could start a fight that left blood on the floor. That's how precise the politics were, every meal, a transaction of respect and survival." In Parchman Farm, Mississippi, known for its violent reputation, the kitchen became the underworld's headquarters. Court filings from a 2018 class action lawsuit revealed how prison staff looked the other way while kitchen workers traded food for protection. Potatoes were exchanged for cigarettes, chicken legs for favors, and commissary access for silence. Inmates in charge of serving lines even built coded systems. A double tap on the tray meant safe, a long pause meant watch out. Food was no longer nourishment, it was negotiation. But the most terrifying evolution came when the deadliest inmates began running the menu. In 2009, an FBI investigation into Illinois State Prison uncovered an entire black market network operating through the kitchen. A high-ranking member of the Latin Kings, using the alias Reyes, was found to have orchestrated drug trades and extortion schemes while working in food prep. He used soup shipments as cover, heroin packed inside seasoning packets. Each meal served with poison and profit. Prison officials described it as organized chaos under the smell of chili. It wasn't an isolated case. At Rikers Island, New York, correctional officers were indicted in 2016 after being caught selling kitchen passes to inmates in exchange for cash and cell phones. Whoever got those passes gained access to storage rooms and to power. It was there, according to New York State Attorney reports, that gang leaders held secret meetings, using food trays to hide contraband phones and notes. An officer involved in the case confessed under oath. "We thought the kitchen was harmless. But it became the command post." The kitchen, for many inmates, was the only place where steel doors didn't separate them. It was where rivals stood side by side with knives, grease, and exhaustion, forced to cooperate or die trying. And that tension, simmering like the soup pots around them, turned deadly fast. At Marion Correctional Institution, Ohio, a 2014 brawl over stolen kitchen ingredients erupted into a riot that left 1 man dead and 6 injured. The trigger? A missing scoop of sugar, stolen by a gang affiliate who refused to share it. Inmate testimony described how the fight spread through the chow hall like fire over oil. Officials later called it a misunderstanding. But according to court testimony, it was anything but. It was about dominance, and it started with food. Within these kitchens, hierarchy wasn't written, it was cooked. The line boss gave orders like a general, the server enforced rules like soldiers, and those who disobeyed got burned, literally. Boiling oil attacks became a silent punishment across facilities from San Quentin to Attica, a weapon of humiliation more than death. Guards often called it kitchen justice. Inmates called it revenge stew. A 2015 BBC World Service report revealed that similar dynamics existed globally, from South Africa's Pollsmoor prison to Brazil's Carandiru. In Pollsmoor, rival gangs controlled kitchen shifts to starve out weaker inmates and assert racial dominance. In Carandiru, before its infamous 1992 massacre, kitchen access was reserved for the most violent factions. Food was no longer a basic right, it was a mirror of power. The psychological effect was devastating. According to Stanford criminologist Dr. Craig Haney, who studied long-term inmate behavior, control of food inside prisons replicates the control of territory outside. It creates leaders, enforcers, and fear, the same mechanics of street crime reborn behind bars. That's why many lifers, already stripped of everything, sought one last piece of influence through the kitchen. Because behind every tray they filled, they regained what prison tried to erase: agency. In the summer of 2021, at Red Onion State Prison, a rumor spread that the kitchen had been infiltrated by a gang-led food racket. Commissary products were disappearing. Meals were being rationed beyond official orders. When officials investigated, they found that inmate workers had quietly replaced inventory logs, creating a ghost economy inside the storage room. The scandal never made national headlines, but the internal report leaked to journalists painted a grim picture. Over 2 tons of food, unaccounted for. Hundreds of meals, misdirected. Dozens of inmates quietly transferred before questions could be asked. The real story wasn't just theft. It was control, by the same men the system thought it had broken. By the end of the investigation, one phrase written in an officer's log summed up the entire problem. The kitchen isn't part of the prison. The prison is part of the kitchen. Through decades of reform, lawsuits, and lockdowns, the same pattern repeats. When food becomes power, morality disappears. And the men who've mastered violence on the outside simply learn a new recipe for dominance on the inside. Because in the world's toughest prisons, the spoon can crown a king. And a tray can start a war. The final meal, when food becomes the last act of defiance. They say a man's last meal reveals his soul. But inside death row, the final plate tells a darker story, one about guilt, mercy, and a system that still believes dignity can be served on a tray. It begins with a question that chills even the most hardened killers. What do you want for your last meal? For decades across the United States, that question has echoed down the corridors of death row, a final ritual before execution. It's meant to show humanity, a small gesture of respect. But to the men and women waiting behind those steel doors, it's a cruel reminder: mercy comes too late. In Texas, where more inmates have been executed than any other state, the ritual was once famous. Prisoners were allowed to order almost anything, from steak and shrimp to chocolate cake and soda. That changed in 2011, after one inmate, Lawrence Russell Brewer, requested a meal so large it became a national controversy. 2 chicken fried steaks, a triple bacon cheeseburger, a cheese omelet, a pound of barbecue, a pint of ice cream, and 3 root beers. When the food arrived, he didn't take a single bite. He pushed the tray away and said, "I'm not hungry." The backlash was instant. Texas lawmakers ended the tradition that same day. From that point on, every condemned prisoner in the state received the same meal as the general population. No exceptions. No symbolism. Just the system feeding death with routine. But in Florida, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, the tradition still lingers, tightly controlled, but hauntingly preserved. According to Department of Corrections reports, death row inmates are given a budget, usually between $20 and $40, and the meal must come from the prison kitchen. No fast food, no luxury, no delivery. Just whatever comfort can be assembled from a system built on deprivation. And yet, even with those limits, the requests tell powerful stories. In Florida's Union Correctional Institution, a man convicted of triple homicide asked only for a single cup of black coffee. No sugar. No milk. When asked why, he reportedly said, "I don't want to sleep through what's coming." In Georgia, another man asked for communion, bread and wine, the same ritual he said had failed to save him years before. Others asked for childhood favorites, fried chicken, apple pie, biscuits drowned in honey. For some, it was nostalgia. For others, it was confession in disguise. Death row meals reveal more than taste, they expose psychology. A study published by the University of Oxford's Department of Criminology analyzed 500 final meal requests across U.S. prisons. The findings were haunting. Those who maintained innocence tended to decline the meal entirely. Those who accepted guilt often ordered indulgent, comforting foods, sweets, fried meats, or ice cream. As one researcher summarized, the plate becomes a mirror of conscience. Some eat to remember, others refuse to forget. But the cruelty of the ritual isn't always in what's served, it's in who prepares it. Across death rows in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Ohio, inmates on kitchen duty are often assigned to cook those final meals. Sometimes, unknowingly. At Angola prison, a man known publicly only as Chef Kenny spent 20 years behind bars cooking for others, including death row. In a 2018 BBC interview, he said, "They'd tell us it's just another tray. But you knew. You could feel it in the silence." He described the smell of fried chicken and cornbread lingering hours after the execution, the aroma of life fading into ritual. "We cooked for the living, not the dying," he said. But in here, that line disappears. Outside the U.S., the tradition takes darker turns. In Japan, prisoners on death row are never told their execution date. They eat breakfast each morning not knowing it might be their last. Their final meal is chosen for them, often miso soup and rice, simple, silent, and unceremonial. According to Amnesty International, it's designed to avoid emotional disruption. In Iran and Saudi Arabia, the condemned sometimes share a symbolic last meal with their family before being taken away. But that reunion is brief, and rarely private. Even mercy is controlled. In the United Kingdom, before the death penalty was abolished in 1965, the final meal was an unspoken formality. Records from HM Prison Pentonville show that condemned men were offered whiskey, cigarettes, and a simple breakfast before hanging. Few ate. Many smoked. One note from a warden's log read simply, "He smiled at the eggs, then pushed them away." Every meal tells a story, but for some, it's a message to the living. In 1994, an inmate in Oklahoma requested a single slice of bread with butter. Before he ate it, he said to the chaplain, "This is for the poor who never got a last meal." In another case, inmate James Reynolds asked for a full buffet of comfort food but requested it be donated to homeless shelters instead of served to him. His request was denied, but the gesture was never forgotten. Psychologists who work with death row inmates often describe this ritual as a paradox of compassion. The system that condemned them offers kindness it denied all along. It's a final illusion of control. One last chance to choose before everything else is taken away. But not everyone accepts it. In Ohio, several inmates refused their final meal outright, saying they didn't want to pretend at peace. One simply wrote on his form, "No meal. Just water. I've eaten enough lies." The final meal exposes the strange theater of justice, a performance staged between guilt and forgiveness. Outside those walls, people debate morality and law. Inside, a man stares at his plate and faces eternity. To the system, it's closure. To him, it's contradiction. To history, it's a mirror of how we define humanity, not by how we punish, but by how we feed the condemned. And maybe that's the real truth buried beneath every tray. That food, once a tool of punishment, becomes in the end a symbol of forgiveness no one believes in anymore. Because when the lights dim and the tray is taken away, the question remains. Who is the meal really for, the men about to die, or the world that needs to believe it still has mercy? Stop sign disclaimer. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. Verified information sourced from Amnesty International, BBC, the Marshall Project, Department of Corrections reports, University of Oxford, and official U.S. court filings. The hunger that never ends. In the end, this story was never just about food. It was about power. The power to feed, to starve, to decide who lives with dignity and who dies forgotten. From the filthy kitchens of Angola to the silent cells of ADX Florence, food has always been more than a meal, it's been the quietest form of control. A weapon that leaves no bruises, a punishment that hides behind stainless steel trays. Inside these walls, hunger isn't an accident. It's a system. A design meant to remind every inmate, no matter how strong, violent, or unbreakable, that survival depends on the hand that feeds them. But what the system never understood is that hunger can't only break men. It can also unite them. In Pelican Bay, inmates starved to protest their cages. In Angola, lifers risked punishment to share food from their own plates. And on death row, condemned men turned their final meal into their final message, mercy for others, forgiveness for none. It's here that the line between cruelty and compassion blurs. Because even in the harshest corners of justice, every bite still carries a story, a confession, a rebellion, a memory of freedom that refuses to die. So when the world looks away and says, they deserve it, remember this. Every society is judged not by how it feeds the innocent, but by how it treats the forgotten. Behind every locked door, behind every clanging tray and empty stomach, there's a question that echoes through generations. Are we punishing bodies, or erasing souls? This is the hidden truth of prison food. The hunger that never ends. Because no matter how many meals are served, the appetite for control always comes back. And for those who live, or die, inside the system, the menu never really changes. Only the names do. If you've made it this far, you've seen a truth most people never do. Share this story, subscribe for more real crime documentaries, and remember, justice isn't just about punishment. It's about what we feed it. Stop sign disclaimer. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. Verified sources, Amnesty International, BBC, the Marshall Project, The Advocate, the Clarion Ledger, University of Oxford, and official U.S. court filings.